If you love Paul Harvey stories and the rest of the story, subscribe now.
It was such a beautiful dream, but little Phoebe Ann Moses was not to remember it. The young servant girl had been mending one of the master's stockings, and yet, weary from a long day's chores, she had fallen asleep, sitting with the stocking in her lap. That's when a heavy cane came down on her back and awakened her in agony from that beautiful dream. The wielder of the weapon was the mistress of the house, a Mrs. Wolf. Cold, relentless, a woman whose north wind presence could chill the warmest summer day. Life on that West Ohio farm was hard for all of them. Mrs. Wolf reasoned, why should it not be particularly hard for the servant girl, who was receiving the handsome sum of 50 cents a week for her services? I hasten to add that little Phoebe Ann did her very best to please the Wolf family. Her drudgery began at 4 every morning, whereupon she prepared a huge breakfast of ham, fried potatoes, and cornmeal mush for the farmer and his wife. Her own breakfast consisted of the leftovers. Sometimes there were none. Afterward, Phoebe Ann hurried to the barn to milk the cows, then back to the kitchen to strain the milk. There were calves and pigs to feed. The Wolf's baby required constant care. 2 more enormous meals had to be prepared. So exhausted was the little servant girl by nightfall that she could scarcely stay awake to mend the family's clothing. It all ought to have been so different. But when Phoebe Ann's father had died, her mother, herself working day and night as a district nurse, was compelled to leave the girl in an orphanage. The orphanage had assigned the child to the Wolf farm. The Wolves had assured Phoebe Ann's mother that her little girl was happy, well-fed, and attending school regularly, none of which was true. In fact, her education was so lacking that the youngster, fully 11 years old, was nevertheless unable even to write to her mother and tell her what was wrong. And of course Mrs. Wolf intercepted all of the letters from home and destroyed them. Thus Phoebe Ann was isolated on the Wolf farm and forced to endure increasing hardships, including more frequent and more severe beatings, until that one night. That was the night I've described, when the servant girl was repairing stockings, when she fell irresistibly asleep, and when she was brutally awakened from her dreams. That night the child decided to run away, and she did. The following day, reaching a nearby town, Phoebe Ann borrowed enough for a train ticket and eventually found her mother, from whom she would not be parted again. But all the rest of her life, Phoebe Ann Moses would remember her cruel treatment on the Wolf farm. She would seek in any and every way she could to make the lives of all needy children a little more full, a little more warm, a little better. Phoebe Ann was to become famous in her lifetime, and although she married happily, she was to have no children of her own. Nonetheless, thanks to a fortune accrued from her successful career as a performer,